Hello and welcome to Generation 16, the series that showcases the games of Sega's Mega Drive. I'm your host, Greg Seward. In this episode, we move into the second half of summer 1990 with the debut of two new third-party publishers, as well as Sega's continued focus on sports games on the Genesis. Let's get started. Although it was released first on the Mega Drive in Japan, Cyberball is actually the third American game for the system after Columns and Budokan. It was developed by Atari Games and originally released in the arcades in 1988. Technically, Cyberball is also the first American football game for the Genesis, though it feels like a bit of a stretch to say that. Either way, it's significant when you think about just how closely the sport and the system would be linked in the coming years. Cyberball is a futuristic take on America's game. It is the year 2022. Rather than humans, all players are robots. A first down is not awarded until you pass the 50-yard line. Oh, and the ball has been replaced with a 350-pound bomb. Otherwise, this is just like football. After the kickoff, your team has a limited number of plays to get the ball over the 50-yard line. If successful, you have the same number of plays to score a touchdown. After each play, the ball heats up a little bit more until it goes critical. The speed of the music during play selection is an indicator of how hot the ball is. If the ball does not cross the 50-yard line, the goal line, or change possession while it is critical, it will explode at the end of that play, damaging the player holding it and resulting in a change of possession.
Ready, set, hot.
The game is simple, but not too bad overall. Nowadays, over 2 decades after the fact, the passing game takes a bit of time to get used to. Control switches from the quarterback directly to the intended receiver the instant the ball is thrown, leading to a lot of incomplete passes when you first start playing the game. The Genesis version of Cyberball features a full season mode as well, where players can spend earnings to upgrade individual athletes on their roster. Despite that though, this cart feels pretty basic overall. But hey, another American sport to add to the system's library. Here it is, the game that sold me a Genesis. I can vividly remember the first time I ever saw Super Monaco GP on display. I was in total awe. I had seen the Genesis before, but nothing impressed me like this game did. Cockpit view, Formula 1 tracks, and it all looks so good. I talked my dad into renting the system and the game that day, and I started saving my money. I owned the console and Super Monaco GP within the month. Super Monaco GP was based on the most recent of Sega's arcade Monaco GP series. In it, you run 2 races, one in dry weather and one in wet, over an original course loosely based on the real Monaco Grand Prix circuit. But it doesn't end there. Like Super Hang-On before it, Super Monaco GP features an extended career mode complete with a bit of player progression. Here you take on an entire field of drivers and cars that have been inspired by those found on real F1 circuits throughout the 80s. Instead of McLaren, Ferrari, and Arrows, you'll be driving for teams like Madonna, Ferenz, and Bullets. The liveries on each car belie their real-world counterparts. You start your career on the third-tier team Minare, tasked with becoming the champion. You do this by challenging and beating drivers on better teams. Keep beating them, and those teams will eventually offer you a seat, putting you in a faster car and enabling you to win more points, ultimately earning the championship. If you do win a championship, superfast upstart G. Sarah appears and costs you your ride. Then your job is to regain your sweet seat with Team Madonna and defend your title.
Nice driving. Good luck.
In a post-Gran Turismo Forza Motorsport world, the gameplay in Super Monaco GP feels very simplistic, because it is. The winning strategy on most tracks is to move to the far inside of every turn and control the subsequent slide using the throttle and brake to maintain as much speed as possible on exit. That being said though, the tracks are extremely varied and you'll find that you can't just go full throttle through the whole game. Each track is based on one of the 16 circuits run in the 1989 F1 season, so it features such legendary racing tracks as Monza, Monaco, Suzuka, Spa, and Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. And the game is so impressive for a console racer circa 1990. It looks gorgeous. The scaling effect is excellent, real weather variations affect grip, you can actually see your driver steering the car, it has pit stops, tire wear, even a rearview mirror. Super Monaco GP is the first of many F1 games we'll be seeing in Generation 16. In the 80s and 90s, unlike today, there were a lot of Japanese developers churning out F1 games across the arcades, home consoles, and computers. The country had a bit of a love affair with F1, and in particular with Ayrton Senna, who had won the championship in 1988 driving a Honda-powered McLaren MP44. Senna was the darling of Honda, to the point that he was heavily involved in the development of the Honda NSX. For a long time, Senna was F1 in Japan. In fact, while Sega didn't have an F1 license, it's pretty obvious that the car featured on Super Monaco GP's arcade cabinet is, in fact, Ayrton Senna's championship McLaren MP44. It's no surprise that the Mega Drive sequel to Monaco GP actually features the Brazilian champion's name right in the title. Taito returns with their third Mega Drive game, and of course, it's another arcade port. This time it's Rastan Saga II, a side-scrolling hack-and-slash platformer. Rastan Saga II was released in arcades in 1989, the sequel to the popular Rastan Saga, which came out in 1987. As you probably surmised by now, this is another case of a licensed game without a license. Rastan borrows heavily from Robert E. Howard's Conan character and story. The original arcade game's ending even mirrors the ending of 1982's Conan the Barbarian film, with the titular character, now much older, sitting on a throne wearing a crown. Rastan Saga was, by all accounts, a pretty popular arcade game, and at first glance, Rastan Saga II ups the ante. All the platforming and sword slashing is augmented by larger characters and generally better graphics, something that is retained for the most part in the Genesis port. Except the platforming is awful. Where Rastan Saga featured very vertical levels that offered the player a certain amount of freedom while navigating, Rastan Saga II's levels are extremely linear, and made even less fun thanks to the character's clunky jumps. The hack and slash stuff, not so great either. While Rastan Saga II features some cool weapons and both an upward and downward slash, the enemy AI is about as stupid as can be. Enemies attack in one of two ways: standing still and waiting for you to get within range, or marching forward without any regard for their own safety, shrugging off damage in favor of constant forward momentum. And the graphics? Yeah, they're pretty, but the animation leaves a lot to be desired. Rastan Saga II, a game that looks so wonderful in screenshots and is so disappointing in motion. to welcome back two names we haven't seen since episode 4. Developer Cyclone System and publisher Sigma Protech previously teamed up on the Mega Drive port of Zoom. This time they bring us Shadow Blasters, a wholly original action platformer that bears more than a passing resemblance to Sega's own Mystic Defender. In fact, up until I started this series, I would regularly get screenshots of these two games mixed up. Shadow Blasters is the story of 4 warriors who have been deemed worthy of saving the world. It's all about gods and demons and the human race having to stand up for itself rather than depending on benevolent hired beings to fight their battles for them. One thing that makes Shadow Blasters notable is the fact that you can choose to play as any of the 4 characters, and you can swap between them at will. And you'll want to do that because each fighter's weapons are slightly different. Plus, they can all be powered up 4 times. And death is permanent. If any of the warriors falls in battle, they can no longer be selected unless the player has to continue the game. Shadow Blasters also features a Mega Man-style level select, allowing you to tackle any level in any order. I suppose this adds a bit of strategy to the game, as you can level up your warrior's attacks, but honestly, the advantage of the feature is a bit lost due to the fact that it's possible to continue an infinite number of times, making it really easy to just keep tackling every level in any order and simply powering through the game. Shadow Blasters clearly has a lot going for it, but it's all wasted on extremely boring level and enemy design. This game just never gets all that exciting or fun to play. The challenges are generic, which gives you very little reason to call on each warrior's specific talents. It's a great idea that gets lost in poor execution. Shadow Blasters is also the first appearance by publisher Sage's Creation. I don't know much about this company outside of the fact that they specialized in porting Japanese games to the US, and that, like Sigma Protech and Cyclone System, they didn't last very long. In fact, Shadow Blasters marks the final appearance of Sigma Protech on Generation 16. Stormlord, along with the recent release of Populous, spearheaded what would become a large collection of British-developed PC games being ported to the Genesis. This was originally released in the UK in 1989 across the usual suspects of hardware, the Atari ST, Amstrad CPC, Amiga, Commodore 64, and ZX Spectrum. Stormlord's story is, well, it's what you'd expect. Queen Bad has kidnapped all the fairies in the land, and it's up to you to save them. Your barbarian isn't the most agile guy in the world, but he can jump and shoot. The game is a mixture of standard platforming and puzzle solving, as it's not always totally clear how to reach every fairy when you see them. In fact, the warp to some fairies can usually be found halfway across the level. Stormlord is pretty mediocre. It's too generic and too frustratingly difficult in spots to be that much fun. The collision detection also seems really off. It just isn't a lot of fun to play. It did make a splash when it was first released, though. Like its publisher Razorsoft, Stormlord is more remembered for the controversy it stirred up than the quality of the game itself. First of all, the original versions of Stormlord were simply drowning in naked women. The title screen, the fairies, and all those statues in the game were buck naked. When it was first announced that Stormlord was coming to the Genesis, there was a bit of debate about whether Sega would even allow the game to be released in its original form. In the end, Razorsoft apparently chose to censor the game itself and gave the women in the game some skimpy clothing. Sega also ended up suing Razorsoft and developer Punk Developments in April 1991 for breach of contract, conspiracy, fraud, unauthorized use of copyrights, trademarks and logos, and misappropriation of intellectual properties. In an interview with Sega16.com, ex-Punk coder Kevin Seghetti stated that he thought the lawsuit centered around the fact that Razorsoft ships Stormlord on its own cartridges, rather than ones bought from Sega. The game was licensed and everything, but like Nintendo, Sega also required its third-party partners to buy the physical cartridges from the publisher itself. Eventually, Sega and Razorsoft reached some sort of settlement, and Razorsoft would continue to release games on the system, usually games that pushed the violence envelope a little. It's kind of ironic that Razorsoft became known for rather gory, violent games after choosing Stormlord as its first Genesis project. The original developer of Stormlord was Hewson Consultants, which was founded by Andrew Hewson. Hewson also founded the European Leisure Software Publishers Association. The ELSPA introduced a voluntary rating system to the UK games industry in 1994, a system which was the basis for the Pan-European Game Information Rating System, better known as PEGI, that is still used in Europe to this day. Stormlord is also significant for some of the names attached to it, in particular Jeff Spangenberg. Stormlord was the first Genesis game for his development group, Punk Entertainment, but you might be more familiar with the games from his next company, Iguana Entertainment, which developed a bunch of games for Sunsoft and Acclaim, most notably the Turok series on N64. Jeff later went on to found Retro Studios, known for the Metroid Prime and Donkey Kong Country Returns series. Though Jeff had moved on before a lot of that success happened in order to found Top Heavy Studios, whose only title was The Guy Game, a terrible trivia game that really only served as an excuse to film topless co-eds on spring break. And that'll do it for this episode of Generation 16. Thanks for watching. Be sure to come back for episode 12. It's going to be a real thriller.